The silence hit Logan Reed like a physical blow, thick and suffocating as morning fog before a thunderstorm. His 2-year-old daughter Ellie's laughter echoed through their suburban kitchen, her tiny, socked feet drumming against her booster chair as she played with her plastic spoon. The golden morning light streaming through the window caught her messy curls, making them shine like spun gold as she sat before her bowl of banana cinnamon oatmeal. Dana, their trusted nanny for 6 months, cooed softly while coaxing another spoonful toward the toddler's mouth. Everything looked perfect, peaceful, normal, but Ranger knew better. The 92-pound German shepherd stood frozen in the kitchen doorway like a statue carved from stone and sinew, his battle-scarred muzzle rigid with tension. This was no ordinary dog. This was a decorated K9 veteran who had pulled Logan from a collapsed building in Mosul, a 4-legged soldier whose instincts had been forged under fire and sharpened by years of detecting danger that human senses couldn't perceive. His ears stood at full alert, his breathing barely perceptible, his dark eyes locked onto something that made Logan's blood run cold. In 8 years of partnership through war zones and police work, Ranger had never frozen like this, unless death was in the room. The breakfast scene that moments before had felt like domestic bliss now crackled with invisible menace, and Logan's military-trained intuition began screaming that something was terribly, catastrophically wrong with this picture-perfect Wednesday morning. Without warning, Ranger exploded into motion with the devastating precision of a missile launch. The sound of his claws scraping against kitchen tile pierced the morning air like gunshots as 92 pounds of trained muscle and fury rocketed across the room. Logan didn't even have time to shout before Ranger's jaws clamped down on Dana's forearm with surgical accuracy, sending the plastic spoon spinning through the air in a metallic arc that seemed to move in slow motion. Ellie's scream split the kitchen like a fire alarm, while Dana stumbled backward, her face twisted in shock and terror as she stared down at the powerful jaws locked around her arm. But something was wrong with this attack, something that made Logan's blood freeze in his veins. Ranger wasn't shaking his prey, wasn't tearing flesh, wasn't displaying the savage violence of a rabid animal. Instead, he held Dana's arm in a controlled vice grip, his dark eyes never leaving the fallen spoon that now lay motionless on the counter, a strange pinkish residue glistening on its surface under the morning light. This wasn't random aggression, this was calculated intervention, and Logan realized with dawning horror that his decorated K9 partner had just stopped something unspeakable from happening. Dana's voice cracked through her sobs as she clutched her bleeding arm, insisting she had done nothing wrong, but Ranger's unwavering focus on that innocent-looking spoon told a different story entirely. The bowl of oatmeal sat untouched on Ellie's high chair, and Logan found himself staring at it with growing dread, wondering what deadly secret lay hidden beneath its creamy surface, and why his war-tested partner had risked everything to prevent his daughter from taking one more bite. In the quiet suburbs of Pine County, where white picket fences frame manicured lawns and children's laughter drifts from backyard swing sets, evil doesn't announce itself with fanfare or warning signs. It arrives wearing a smile, carrying coffee, and singing nursery rhymes while plotting the unthinkable. This is the story of Logan Reed, a single father and military veteran whose world nearly shattered on an ordinary Wednesday morning when he learned that the greatest threats to our families often come disguised as their protectors. It's also the story of Ranger, a battle-scarred German shepherd whose war-tested instincts became the only thing, standing between a 2-year-old girl and a carefully orchestrated nightmare that would have destroyed an entire family. What you're about to witness isn't just another tale of animal heroism, it's a chilling reminder that predators walk among us with practiced patience, forged credentials, and the terrifying ability to blend seamlessly into our most intimate spaces. Logan Reed thought he had done everything right. After losing his wife in a car accident 3 years earlier, he had transformed himself from a grief-stricken widower into a devoted single father, working tirelessly to create a safe and nurturing environment for his daughter Ellie. He had interviewed dozens of potential caregivers, run extensive background checks, and chosen Dana Blake, a soft-spoken woman from the Midwest who seemed to genuinely love children and came with glowing references. For 6 months, Dana had been the perfect nanny, punctual, patient, creative, and utterly trustworthy. She sang lullabies during nap time, took Ellie to the park every afternoon, and even helped with household chores without being asked. Logan had finally begun to believe that his family had found stability after years of upheaval. But Ranger saw what human eyes couldn't detect. This 92-pound German shepherd wasn't just a pet, he was a decorated K-9 veteran whose service record included 2 tours in Afghanistan and 5 years with the Metropolitan Police Department. His instincts had been honed by years of detecting explosives, tracking fugitives, and sensing danger in situations where a split-second decision meant the difference between life and death. When other dogs played, Ranger observed. When other dogs barked at squirrels, Ranger watched people. His loyalty to Logan had been forged in the crucible of combat, where he had literally pulled his handler from the rubble of a bombed building, and that same unwavering devotion now extended to every member of Logan's family, especially little Ellie, whom he guarded with the fierce protectiveness of a surrogate father. The morning everything changed began like any other, with the ordinary rhythms of domestic life that mask the extraordinary dangers lurking just beneath the surface of our everyday world. The kitchen of Logan Reed's modest 2-story home on Sycamore Street had always been the heart of their small family's daily routine, a warm sanctuary filled with the comforting aromas of fresh coffee and toasted bread, where father and daughter shared their most precious moments together. That Wednesday morning started with the same gentle rhythms that had defined their lives for months. Logan standing at the sink, rinsing Ellie's bottles, while steam rose from his mug of reheated coffee, the morning sunlight painting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors and illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. Ellie sat in her booster chair, wearing a sunshine yellow dress dotted with tiny daisies, her chubby legs swinging with the boundless energy of a happy 2-year-old as she clutched her favorite plastic spoon in one dimpled fist. Her breakfast bowl sat before her, filled with creamy oatmeal, mixed with sliced bananas and a dash of cinnamon, the same meal she had eaten every morning for weeks without complaint, because Dana had discovered it was her absolute favorite. The nanny moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, her soft voice humming a gentle melody as she prepared Ellie's juice and straightened the counter, her pale pink hoodie and faded jeans giving her the appearance of any suburban mother going through her morning routine. Everything about the scene radiated domestic tranquility and safety, from the cheerful chatter of morning radio playing softly in the background to the familiar creaks of the old house settling into another day. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, invisible currents of danger were already swirling through the air like poison gas, undetectable to human senses, but as clear as a 5-alarm fire to the battle-tested instincts of a German shepherd who had learned to read the subtle signs of impending catastrophe. Ranger had positioned himself in the kitchen doorway with the tactical precision of a sentry guarding a military compound, his massive frame filling the space between the hallway and the room where his family gathered each morning. His dark eyes swept the scene with the methodical intensity of a trained surveillance operative, cataloguing every movement, every sound, every scent that drifted through the warm air. Where Logan saw his trusted nanny preparing breakfast with loving care, Ranger detected something else entirely, an almost imperceptible tension in Dana's movements, a barely visible tremor in her hands as she stirred the oatmeal, and most troubling of all, a metallic odor that seemed to cling to the spoon she held like an invisible shroud of menace. The dog's nostrils flared as he processed the chemical, signature that human noses couldn't distinguish from the sweet scents of breakfast, and every fiber of his being screamed that this morning was different, that the woman who had lived in their home for 6 months was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The explosion of violence came without warning, erupting from the morning calm like thunder from a clear sky, as Ranger transformed from motionless sentinel to ballistic missile in the span of a heartbeat. The powerful German Shepherd launched himself across the kitchen with the devastating precision of a guided weapon, his muscular frame cutting through the air with such force that the very atmosphere seemed to part around him like water. The sound of his claws scraping against the ceramic tiles created a symphony of terror that would haunt Logan's nightmares for months to come, each scratching note building to a crescendo of protective fury that had been brewing in the dog's chest since the moment Dana had approached Ellie's high chair with that seemingly innocent spoon. Logan's world shifted into slow motion as he watched his loyal partner collide with the woman he had trusted with his daughter's life, the impact sending shockwaves through the kitchen that rattled dishes in the cabinets and caused Ellie's juice cup to tumble from the counter in a spinning arc of orange liquid. Dana's scream pierced the morning air like a banshee's wail as Ranger's powerful jaws clamped down on her forearm with the controlled precision of a surgical instrument, his teeth penetrating fabric and flesh with enough force to draw blood, but not enough to shatter bone. This wasn't the wild savagery of a rabid animal. This was the calculated intervention of a trained professional who had learned to neutralize threats with maximum efficiency and minimum collateral damage. The plastic spoon flew from Dana's grip in a perfect parabola, spinning end over end, before clattering against the granite countertop with a metallic ring that seemed to echo through the sudden silence, like a death knell. Ellie's terrified screams filled the kitchen as her 2-year-old mind struggled to process the chaos erupting around her breakfast table, her tiny hands reaching desperately for her father, while tears streamed down her flushed cheeks. Logan's military training kicked in with automatic precision as he barked the command that had ended countless confrontations in war zones and police operations, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded respect in life-or-death situations. Ranger released Dana's arm immediately, backing away with his ears still pinned forward and his dark eyes fixed on the fallen spoon with laser-like intensity, as if that innocent piece of plastic contained secrets that could unlock the mystery of his violent outburst. Dana crumpled to the floor, clutching her wounded arm, blood seeping through the torn fabric of her hoodie as she sobbed with a mixture of pain, shock, and what Logan would later recognize as the desperate panic of someone whose carefully constructed facade had just been shattered by an animal who couldn't be fooled by human deception. The kitchen that moments before had been filled with the warm sounds of family life now resonated with the aftermath of violence, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the palpable tension of a crisis that would change everything Logan thought he knew about the woman he had invited into his home. The silence that followed Ranger's attack felt heavier than lead, broken only by Dana's ragged breathing and Ellie's diminishing sobs as Logan scooped his daughter into his protective embrace, her tiny body trembling against his chest like a frightened bird. The kitchen had transformed from a sanctuary into a crime scene in the span of 30 seconds, with droplets of blood marking the white tiles like crimson breadcrumbs, leading to a truth that Logan's rational mind wasn't yet ready to accept. Dana sat hunched against the cabinet doors, her face pale as parchment and streaked with tears that seemed too calculated, too perfectly timed to be entirely genuine, while she clutched her wounded arm and repeated the same desperate mantra that she had done nothing wrong, that the dog had simply gone crazy without provocation. But Logan's eyes weren't focused on Dana's theatrical display of innocence instead. They were drawn to the plastic spoon lying motionless on the granite counter. its surface gleaming with a substance that definitely wasn't banana or cinnamon. The pinkish residue caught the morning light with an oily sheen that made his stomach clench with the kind of premonitional dread that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan, when the difference between survival and catastrophe often came down to noticing details that didn't belong in their environment. The distant wail of sirens began to penetrate the suburban morning quiet, growing louder with each passing second as emergency vehicles raced towards Sycamore Street, summoned by neighbors who had heard the screaming and assumed the worst. Logan found himself caught in a surreal nightmare, where everything he thought he knew about his life was crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane wind. Ranger stood near the pantry, with the calm dignity of a soldier who had completed his mission, showing none of the agitation or continued aggression that would be expected from a dog who had genuinely snapped under stress. His dark eyes remained fixed on that contaminated spoon with unwavering focus, as if he could see the invisible poison that human senses couldn't detect, and Logan began to understand that this wasn't random violence, but surgical intervention by an animal whose instincts had been honed by years of detecting threats that could kill his family. The paramedics arrived first, followed closely by 2 police officers from Logan's former department who approached the situation with the careful professionalism required when dealing with domestic incidents involving children and animal attacks. They wrapped Dana's arm in pristine white gauze while taking statements, their voices echoing through the kitchen like distant thunder as they documented what appeared to be a straightforward case of unprovoked aggression by a retired K-9 who had perhaps suffered some kind of psychological breakdown. But Logan caught the way Ranger's ears perked up whenever anyone approached the spoon, the subtle tension that rippled through the dog's powerful frame whenever the conversation turned to the breakfast that had been interrupted, and most telling of all, the protective way he positioned himself between Ellie and the bowl of oatmeal that still sat cooling on her high chair like evidence waiting to be discovered by someone smart enough to recognize what they were really looking at. The official paperwork arrived with the cold brutality of a military discharge, stamped with county seals and legal jargon that transformed Ranger from decorated war hero to dangerous liability in the stroke of a pen. Logan stood in his living room, holding the quarantine order, while watching 2 animal control officers prepare the transport cage that would steal away the most loyal soul he had ever known. Their movements efficient and practiced as they went about the business of destroying his family under the guise of public safety. The bite had been classified as a level 3 unprovoked attack with puncture wounds and bleeding, triggering an automatic 10-day isolation period at the county shelter, where Ranger would undergo psychological evaluation to determine whether he posed an ongoing threat to the community. The irony burned in Logan's chest like acid as he remembered all the commendations and medals gathering dust in his closet, proof of a dog who had saved more lives than most humans ever would, now condemned by a system that measured worth in liability, calculations rather than character. Dana's performance from the back of the ambulance had been Academy Award worthy, her sobs and trembling hands painting the picture of an innocent victim attacked without warning by an unstable animal who had finally revealed his true nature. The neighbors who gathered on their porches to witness the spectacle whispered among themselves with the morbid fascination of people watching a train wreck, their expressions mixing sympathy with the secret relief that comes from knowing the danger had been contained before it spread to their own families. Logan's hands shook as he clipped the familiar leather lead to Ranger's collar for what might be the final time, the dog's calm acceptance of his fate serving as a stark reminder of the military discipline that had been beaten into both of them during their years of service together in places where loyalty was measured in blood and sacrifice. The walk to the van felt like a funeral procession, with Ellie clinging to Logan's leg and crying for the dog who had spent countless hours playing gentle games with her, reading her bedtime stories by lying patiently beside her crib, while Logan's voice filled the darkened nursery with tales of brave knights and loyal dragons. Ranger paused at the van's open door and turned back toward the house with eyes that seemed to burn with unfinished business, as if he could see through walls to the kitchen where evidence of his justification still sat waiting for someone intelligent enough to recognize the truth hidden beneath layers of domestic routine and calculated deception. Logan whispered a promise into his partner's scarred ear, words that felt like a sacred vow carved from desperation and unwavering faith in the bond they had forged through years of facing death together on foreign soil, where the only certainty was that they would protect each other, no matter the cost. The house felt like a tomb after Ranger's departure, its familiar spaces transformed into echoing chambers, where every shadow seemed to hide accusations and every sound carried the weight of unfinished business that demanded resolution. Logan found himself standing in the kitchen doorway at 3 a.m, staring at the spot where his partner had made his desperate stand against an enemy that only he could detect, the silence broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock, marking time like a heartbeat in the darkness. The bowl of oatmeal still sat on Ellie's high chair where the paramedics had left it, now cold and congealed into a lumpy mass that looked more like evidence than breakfast, its innocent appearance masking secrets that Logan's rational mind wasn't ready to accept, but his instincts demanded he investigate. The metallic smell that Ranger had detected still lingered in the air like an invisible signature of danger, too faint for human noses to consciously register, but strong enough to trigger the subconscious alarm bells that had kept Logan alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan, where survival depended on recognizing threats before they became deadly. He approached the high chair with the cautious movements of a bomb disposal expert, his eyes cataloguing every detail of the scene as if it were a crime site that might hold the key to understanding why his decorated war dog had risked everything to prevent his daughter from taking another bite. The plastic spoon lay where it had fallen, its surface still gleaming with that strange pinkish residue that definitely wasn't banana or cinnamon, the oily sheen catching the overhead light in patterns that reminded Logan of chemical contamination he had encountered in overseas laboratories where enemy forces had experimented with substances designed to kill slowly and silently. His hands trembled as he used a paper towel to carefully lift the spoon, his military training screaming that he was handling potential evidence of an attempted murder, disguised as a loving breakfast prepared by a trusted caregiver who had spent 6 months earning his family's complete confidence. The smell that rose from the contaminated utensil made his stomach clench with recognition, a sharp metallic odor that triggered memories of automotive shops and antifreeze spills, substances that could kill a child in doses so small they would be virtually undetectable, until kidney failure began shutting down vital organs with the inexorable precision of a ticking time bomb. Logan scraped the smallest possible sample of the oatmeal into a plastic bag, his movements deliberate and methodical as he prepared to take the first step in what would become a desperate race to prove that Ranger hadn't lost his mind, but had instead demonstrated the kind of protective instinct that separated true heroes from ordinary animals who simply followed commands without understanding their deeper purpose. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket as he realized that his partner's freedom, his daughter's safety, and his own sanity all depended on his ability to uncover evidence that would convince a skeptical world that evil had walked among them, wearing the face of maternal kindness and speaking in the gentle tones of someone who claimed to love children more than her own life. The veterinary toxicology lab on the outskirts of Pine County looked more like a fortress than a medical facility, its concrete walls and security cameras serving as silent testimony to the dangerous substances that were analyzed within its sterile confines by scientists who specialized in detecting the invisible poisons that could destroy lives without leaving obvious traces. Dr. Marlene Jacobs emerged from the building's reinforced entrance with the measured stride of someone who had spent years translating chemical evidence into courtroom testimony. Her greying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her lab coat bearing the subtle stains that came from handling samples that others preferred not to think about. Logan had driven through the night to reach her private facility, the plastic bag containing Ellie's contaminated breakfast burning like radioactive material in his jacket pocket as he struggled to maintain his composure during the journey that would either validate his suspicions or confirm that grief and desperation had driven him to the edge of paranoid delusion. The connection between Logan and Dr. Jacobs stretched back to their overlapping tours in Afghanistan, where she had served as a chemical weapons specialist tasked with analyzing battlefield samples that could reveal whether enemy forces were using prohibited substances against coalition troops and civilian populations. Their paths had crossed during the investigation of a suspected nerve agent attack on a refugee camp, and Logan had never forgotten the calm professionalism with which she had delivered results that saved hundreds of lives by identifying the specific antidote needed to counteract the poison that had been disguised as humanitarian aid supplies. She accepted the sample without questions, her experienced eyes immediately detecting the telltale signs of chemical contamination that confirmed Logan's worst fears before any laboratory analysis had been completed. The distinctive odor that rose from the bag made her nostrils flare with recognition, triggering memories of previous cases where antifreeze had been used as a weapon against victims who trusted their attackers enough to consume food and beverages prepared with lethal intent. Her voice carried the weight of scientific authority as she explained that ethylene glycol was a favorite among poisoners because of its sweet taste and delayed symptoms, allowing perpetrators to establish alibis while their victims slowly succumbed to kidney failure that would appear to be the result of natural illness rather than deliberate murder. The gas chromatography results would take several hours to complete, but Dr. Jacobs had seen enough preliminary evidence to know that Logan's suspicions were grounded in deadly reality rather than the desperate fantasies of a grieving father who refused to accept that his trusted caregiver had attempted to murder his child. Logan left the laboratory with instructions to keep Ellie under constant medical supervision while awaiting confirmation that would transform their domestic crisis into a criminal investigation that would expose the calculated evil hiding behind Dana Blake's maternal facade. The drive home felt like traveling through a nightmare landscape where every familiar landmark had been transformed into a reminder that predators could infiltrate the most secure environments by exploiting the basic human need to trust those who claim to care for our most vulnerable family members. The anonymous note arrived like a ghost from the shadows, slipped through Logan's mail slot with the stealth of someone who understood. That truth sometimes required the protection of darkness to survive in a world where predators had learned to manipulate the very systems designed to protect their victims. The message was typed on plain white paper, with no return address, no fingerprints, no trace of its origin except for the words that would shatter everything Logan thought he knew about the woman who had lived in his house for 6 months while plotting the systematic murder of his daughter. The text was simple and terrifying. In its implications, he's not wrong. Look inside her purse. She was never supposed to stay this long. Logan stared at the cryptic warning with hands that trembled from a mixture of vindication and horror, recognizing that someone else had been watching Dana Blake with the same suspicion that had driven Ranger to risk everything in order to protect Ellie from a threat that human eyes couldn't detect. The purse sat exactly where Dana had left it during her panicked flight to the hospital, tucked beneath the umbrella stand in the front hallway, like a time bomb, waiting for someone brave enough to examine its contents and uncover the secrets that had been hidden beneath layers of maternal performance and calculated deception. Logan approached the leather bag with the cautious movements of a soldier entering enemy territory, his military training screaming that he was about to discover evidence that would transform their domestic crisis into something far more sinister than a simple case of mistaken trust. The contents spilled across his kitchen table like artifacts from a carefully constructed alternate reality. Receipts from Target, half a granola bar, expired gum, and a Metro bus card from Chicago that bore the faded image of a woman who looked familiar but somehow different from the person he had known as Dana Blake. The prescription bottle hidden in the bag's inner pocket carried a name that made Logan's blood freeze in his veins. Malene Carter, not Dana Blake, with medications prescribed by the Northside Women's Correctional Facility for anxiety and depression that had gone untreated for 2 years since her early release on supervised parole. The newspaper clipping, folded beneath the pill bottle, told a story of deliberate child abuse, disguised as neglect, with headlines that screamed of a mother who had systematically starved her own daughter while claiming to provide loving care that authorities had been too blind to recognize as calculated torture. The mugshot showed a woman with sunken eyes and matted hair who shared Malene Carter's bone structure but lacked the polished facade that had allowed her to infiltrate Logan's family with surgical precision, gaining access to his most vulnerable treasure while wearing the mask of maternal devotion that concealed the heart of a predator who viewed children as objects to be controlled rather than souls to be protected. Logan's hands shook as he realized that everything about Dana Blake had been a lie, constructed with the patience of someone who understood that the best way to destroy a family was to become indispensable to them first, earning trust through months of perfect behavior before revealing the true purpose that had driven her to seek employment in homes where she could continue the twisted experiments that had landed her in prison the first time. Detective Erica Dunn's voice crackled through Logan's phone with the sharp authority of someone who had spent 20 years chasing predators through the darkest corners of human depravity, her words carrying the weight of official validation that transformed Logan's desperate suspicions into a legitimate criminal investigation. The Bolo alert had been issued within hours of Logan's call, flooding every police department, hospital, and border checkpoint across 3 states with Malene Carter's photograph and the urgent warning that she was a dangerous fugitive who posed an immediate threat to children wherever she might. Surface next, the realization that a convicted child abuser had been living under a false identity while working as a nanny sent shockwaves through the domestic staffing industry, exposing fatal flaws in background check systems that allowed predators to reinvent themselves with nothing more than forged documents and carefully rehearsed lies. Logan found himself thrust into the role of primary witness in a case that would expose how easily monsters could infiltrate the most protected spaces of American family life, using the basic human need to trust caregivers as a weapon against the very children they claimed to nurture and protect. The investigation revealed that Malene had changed her name legally in Arkansas just 2 months after her early release from prison, exploiting bureaucratic gaps between state and federal databases to create a new identity that would pass superficial screening by agencies desperate to fill positions in an understaffed childcare market. Her employment history showed a disturbing pattern of short-term placements with families who had young children, each job lasting just long enough to establish trust before she would disappear, with references that praised her dedication and reliability while concealing the true purpose behind her maternal performance. The forensic IT specialist Logan contacted through military connections traced her digital footprint to a network of burner phones and prepaid internet accounts that painted the picture of someone who understood that survival depended on remaining invisible to law enforcement agencies that might recognize her face from wanted posters or prison records. GPS pings from her recent activity clustered around truck stops and motels near the state line, suggesting that she was following established escape routes used by fugitives who specialized in disappearing into the anonymous landscape of America's highway system, where cash transactions and false names could sustain someone indefinitely. Logan's house had become the center of a multi-agency investigation that brought together local police, state parole officers, and federal agents who specialized in crimes against children, their presence transforming his quiet suburban street into a command center where the pursuit of justice took precedence over neighborhood tranquility. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Logan's shoulders like a lead blanket as he realized that Ellie's survival had depended entirely on Ranger's ability to detect chemical contamination that human senses couldn't perceive, making his imprisoned partner the only witness whose testimony could expose the full scope of Maline's murderous intentions. The midnight silence surrounding Logan's house shattered like glass when Ranger's low growl pierced the darkness with the controlled intensity of a predator who had detected an intruder approaching sacred territory that he was sworn to protect. Logan's military instincts kicked into overdrive as he grabbed his service weapon from the nightstand drawer, his bare feet moving silently across the hardwood floors, while his ears strained to identify the source of danger that had triggered his partner's warning system. Through the kitchen window, a hooded figure moved through the shadows beyond the back fence, with the deliberate stealth of someone who understood that discovery would mean capture and a return to the prison cell she had worked so desperately to escape. Maline Carter had come back to finish what she started, clutching a bottle of concentrated antifreeze and a cloth soaked in chloroform that would ensure Ellie never woke up to identify her killer to the authorities who were closing in on her location with every passing hour. Logan's voice cut through the night air like a blade as he commanded her to freeze, his weapon trained on the woman who had spent 6 months earning his trust while planning the methodical murder of his daughter. Ranger burst through the shadows with the explosive force of a guided missile, his powerful frame blocking Maline's escape route while his baring teeth served as a stark reminder that some crimes deserved immediate justice rather than lengthy court proceedings. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as Detective Dunn's team surrounded the property with the tactical precision of hunters who had finally cornered their quarry after days of relentless pursuit through a landscape where every shadow could hide a killer. Maline's desperate protests about trying to help rather than hurt fell on deaf ears as the evidence of her murderous intentions lay scattered at her feet like the broken pieces of a facade that could no longer conceal the monster hiding beneath her maternal mask. The handcuffs clicked shut with the finality of a closing coffin lid, sealing the fate of a predator who had underestimated the protective instincts of a decorated war dog whose loyalty to his family transcended every law except the primal commandment to guard those who could not guard themselves. Logan knelt beside Ranger in the glow of the police car's flashing lights, his trembling hands stroking the scarred fur of the hero who had saved his daughter's life by recognizing evil when it wore the face of kindness, and spoke in the gentle tones of someone who claimed to love children more than her own twisted desires for control and domination. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Maline Carter's defense attorney announced that his client would enter a guilty plea to all charges, abandoning any pretense of innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence that painted her as a calculating predator who had used maternal instincts as weapons against the families she targeted. The toxicology reports, nanny cam footage, and criminal background check failures had created an airtight case that exposed systematic flaws in the childcare industry while vindicating Ranger's protective actions as heroic intervention, rather than unprovoked aggression. Logan sat in the gallery holding Ellie on his lap, watching justice unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had fought through bureaucratic obstacles and official skepticism to prove that his partner's instincts had been correct from the very beginning. The judge's sentence of 25 years without possibility of parole for 15 years sent a clear message that crimes against children would be met with the full force of the law, especially when committed by individuals who had violated parole conditions while living under false identities. Dr. Marlene Jacobs testified about the lethal concentrations of ethylene glycol found in Ellie's breakfast, explaining to the court how the poison would have caused kidney failure within days if Ranger hadn't prevented the child from consuming the contaminated oatmeal. The animal behaviorist, who had evaluated Ranger during his quarantine period, submitted a formal report recommending immediate release and commendation for exceptional service, noting that the German Shepherd's actions demonstrated the kind of protective instinct that separated true guardians from ordinary pets. Logan's testimony about his partner's military service record and years of flawless behavior as a family companion helped convince the court that Ranger deserved recognition rather than punishment for saving an innocent life. The county officially expunged the dangerous dog classification from Ranger's record, replacing it with a certificate of heroism that acknowledged his role in exposing an attempted murder that might have gone undetected until it was too late to save Ellie. Media coverage of the case sparked nationwide discussions about background check procedures for domestic workers and the remarkable ability of trained dogs to detect chemical threats that human senses couldn't perceive. Logan walked out of the courthouse with Ellie in his arms and Ranger at his side, finally able to breathe freely for the first time since that terrible Wednesday morning when their world had nearly been destroyed by evil disguised as kindness. The arrest of Malene Carter triggered a nationwide investigation that uncovered a disturbing network of domestic placement agencies operating with minimal oversight, allowing convicted criminals to exploit gaps in background check systems while targeting vulnerable families across multiple states. FBI specialists discovered that Malene had worked for at least 7 different families over the past 18 months, each placement lasting just long enough to establish trust before she would disappear with glowing references that concealed her true intentions from future employers who relied on superficial screening procedures. The Chicago police reopened cases involving 3 unexplained childhood deaths that had occurred in neighborhoods where Malene had been employed as a babysitter, finding disturbing parallels in the symptoms that had been attributed to natural causes rather than deliberate poisoning by someone with access to the victim's food and beverages. Hospital records revealed a pattern of emergency room visits involving children who had been in Malene's care, presenting with early signs of kidney distress that doctors had dismissed as minor illnesses rather than evidence of systematic poisoning attempts that had been interrupted before reaching lethal doses. The domestic staffing industry faced congressional hearings that exposed how profit motives had overridden safety considerations, with agencies rushing to fill positions without conducting thorough investigations of applicants who presented polished facades while hiding criminal histories behind legally changed identities. Logan received calls from parents across the country who had employed caregivers matching Malene's description, their voices filled with the terror of realizing that they had unknowingly invited a predator into their homes where she had gained unlimited access to their most precious possessions. The veterinary community rallied behind Ranger's story, using his heroic actions to highlight the remarkable ability of trained dogs to detect chemical threats that human senses couldn't perceive, leading to discussions about incorporating canine units into child protection services. Insurance companies began requiring enhanced screening procedures for domestic workers, while lawmakers introduced legislation mandating federal database checks that would prevent criminals from reinventing themselves by simply crossing state lines and changing their names. The case became a textbook example of how evil could hide behind maternal instincts while systematically targeting the innocent, proving that sometimes the greatest threats to our families come from those who claim to love our children the most. The arrest of Malene Carter triggered a nationwide investigation that uncovered a disturbing network of domestic placement agencies operating with minimal oversight, allowing convicted criminals to exploit gaps in background check systems while targeting vulnerable families across multiple states. FBI specialists discovered that Malene had worked for at least 7 different families over the past 18 months, each placement lasting just long enough to establish trust before she would disappear with glowing references that concealed her true intentions from future employers who relied on superficial screening procedures. The Chicago police reopened cases involving 3 unexplained childhood deaths that had occurred in neighborhoods where Malene had been employed as a babysitter, finding disturbing parallels in the symptoms that had been attributed to natural causes rather than deliberate poisoning by someone with access to the victim's food and beverages. Hospital records revealed a pattern of emergency room visits involving children who had been in Malene's care, presenting with early signs of kidney distress that doctors had dismissed as minor illnesses rather than evidence of systematic poisoning attempts that had been interrupted before reaching lethal doses. The domestic staffing industry faced congressional hearings that exposed how profit motives had overridden safety considerations, with agencies rushing to fill positions without conducting thorough investigations of applicants who presented polished facades while hiding criminal histories behind legally changed identities. Logan received calls from parents across the country who had employed caregivers matching Malene's description, their voices filled with the terror of realizing that they had unknowingly invited a predator into their homes, where she had gained unlimited access to their most precious possessions. The veterinary community rallied behind Ranger's story, using his heroic actions to highlight the remarkable ability of trained dogs to detect chemical threats that human senses couldn't perceive, leading to discussions about incorporating canine units into child protection services. Insurance companies began requiring enhanced screening procedures for domestic workers, while lawmakers introduced legislation mandating federal database checks that would prevent criminals from reinventing themselves by simply crossing state lines and changing their names. The case became a textbook example of how evil could hide behind maternal instincts while systematically targeting the innocent, proving that sometimes the greatest threats to our families come from those who claim to love our children the most. 2 years have passed since that terrifying Wednesday morning when Ranger's protective instincts shattered the illusion of safety that had surrounded Logan's family like a fragile bubble waiting to burst under the weight of a truth too horrifying for most people to comprehend. The house on Sycamore Street now bears the quiet scars of survival, with reinforced security systems, motion-activated cameras, and enhanced background check procedures that serve as permanent reminders of how close evil had come to destroying everything they held sacred while wearing the mask of maternal devotion. The kitchen where it all began has been completely renovated, its surfaces stripped of any trace of that poisoned breakfast, yet Logan still finds himself pausing in the doorway sometimes, remembering the moment when his world shifted from peaceful domesticity to nightmare surveillance in the span of a single heartbeat. Ellie, now 4 years old and vibrant with the boundless energy of childhood, shows no lasting physical effects from her brief exposure to antifreeze, her kidneys having recovered completely under the careful monitoring of specialists who marveled at how close she had come to irreversible organ failure, but she still reaches instinctively for Ranger's reassuring presence whenever strangers approach their home, her small hands tangling in his silver-streaked fur with the intuitive understanding that some guardians see dangers that others cannot perceive, even when those threats wear familiar faces and speak in gentle voices. The German Shepherd has aged gracefully into his role as both family protector and local legend, his battle-scarred muzzle now bearing distinguished streaks of silver that only enhance the dignity of a warrior who proved that heroism comes in many forms, from the battlefield courage that earned him military commendations to the domestic vigilance that saved an innocent child from a predator who had spent months perfecting her deadly performance. Logan has returned to active duty as a K-9 training instructor at the Pine County Police Academy, using Ranger's story to educate new handlers about the remarkable ability of their four-legged partners to detect chemical, biological, and psychological threats that human senses routinely miss, emphasizing that trust in animal instincts can literally mean the difference between tragedy and survival in situations where split-second decisions determine who lives and who dies. The training scenarios he designs now include domestic threat assessment, teaching officers to recognize the signs of poisoning attempts and other forms of child endangerment that might be disguised as accidents or natural illnesses by perpetrators who understand that the best camouflage for murder is the appearance of loving care. His lectures draw standing-room-only crowds of law enforcement professionals, social workers, and pediatric medical staff who hang on every word as he describes how a decorated war dog's refusal to ignore suspicious odors exposed a systematic poisoning plot that would have claimed multiple victims if it had been allowed to continue undetected. The case files from Malene Carter's conviction gather dust in courthouse archives, their pages filled with evidence of a criminal enterprise that stretched across multiple states and potentially dozens of families who had unknowingly invited a predator into their most intimate spaces. Her 25-year sentence serves as cold comfort to the parents who have since learned that their trusted caregiver had been slowly poisoning their children while maintaining the perfect facade of maternal dedication, her victims surviving only because their exposures had been interrupted before reaching lethal concentrations. The FBI's continuing investigation has uncovered a disturbing network of placement agencies that operate with minimal oversight, allowing convicted criminals to exploit bureaucratic gaps while targeting vulnerable families who depend on background check systems that can be defeated with nothing more than a legal name change and forged references from previous employers who never existed. Late at night, when shadows creep across the suburban landscape and normal families sleep peacefully in their beds behind locked doors that offer only the illusion of security, Logan sometimes finds himself standing at his bedroom window, staring out at the quiet street where evil once walked disguised as kindness, wondering how many other Malene Carters are out there right now, perfecting their performances while waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike at the heart of American family life. The questions that haunt his dreams have no easy answers, their implications too vast and terrifying for comfortable contemplation. How many children have died at the hands of trusted caregivers whose crimes were never detected because the symptoms of slow poisoning can be mistaken for natural illness? How many families have buried their babies without ever knowing that maternal love had been weaponized against them by predators who understood that the most effective way to destroy innocence was to become indispensable to it first, earning trust through months of flawless behavior before revealing their true intentions? How many monsters are living among us right now, reading bedtime stories and preparing breakfast while plotting systematic murder with the patience of professional killers who have learned that the greatest crimes are those that leave no obvious evidence of foul play. These mysteries linger in the darkness beyond our suburban streetlights, reminding us that evil never announces itself with warning signs or dramatic confrontations, but instead arrives wearing the faces we trust most and speaking in the gentle voices that promise protection while delivering death with scientific precision. Domestic spaces, where we feel safest from the world's dangers, may actually be the places where we are most vulnerable to predators who have learned to exploit our basic need to trust those who claim to care for our children, turning our homes into hunting grounds where innocence becomes prey and love becomes a weapon, wielded by those who understand that the deepest wounds are inflicted by those we never suspect. In a world where monsters have learned to disguise themselves as angels, where evil wears the mask of maternal instinct and speaks in lullabies while mixing poison into breakfast bowls, perhaps our greatest hope lies not in human judgment or institutional safeguards that can be circumvented by patient criminals, but in the unwavering loyalty of creatures whose senses pierce through carefully constructed deceptions to see the truth that lies beneath layers of performance and manipulation, guardians who judge not by words or appearances, but by the chemical signatures of intent that reveal the difference between genuine love and predatory deception.